Hey, what's up guys? Welcome back to my channel. Nothing like the great outdoors. Well, I'm out here because I want to motivate you, inspire you to use your imagination with me. I want you to think back to a time like in colonial America when there was a shortage of currency. Wait a minute, we don't have to imagine that time. We're living through it. Look at this headline, for example. There is a nationwide coin shortage. And the subhead says Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell said the flow of coins through the US economy has kind of stopped. And that's just one of several stories that you've no doubt heard about recently because of the pandemic. And when you shut down major parts of the economy, you're just not going to have currency in circulation. And one of the most immediate impacts, of course, is when you need quarters to do your laundry, unless you have your own machine, of course. But why did the shortage of coins lead to revolution back then? But for us, it's just making laundry a lot more difficult to do. Stick around. It's time for another episode of the History Behind the Headline. Now, if you're new here, be sure to watch parts 1 and 2 of these episodes before you watch this one. Otherwise, it may not make that much sense to you. This is part 3, and I'm diving right in. Now, if you've read John Lynns' 110-page answer to the Declaration of the American Congress, you might come away thinking that he is King George's BFF. I like to think of him as the king's attack dog. And that may not be an exaggeration, because if you think about it, he says King George is a good king because the king only makes, or rather, the king only exercises his power when it is necessary and wholesome. Now, he says this because it is just the opposite of the words you find in the Declaration of Independence, where it says, the king has refused his assent to laws, the most wholesome and necessary for the public good. Now, what were these laws that the colonists were saying in the Declaration that the king did not approve of? Well, for example, when the colonists wanted to print money because they felt that they need to, due to a lack of currency circulating in their colonies, like coins not circulating in our time, it just didn't have enough. They felt that it was necessary to print money, and the king said no. Well, technically, what was said to the colonies through the Currency Act was, from this point forward, you can't issue any new bills as legal tender, and the ones that you have in circulation, those have to expire at a predetermined date. The net result is, colonies, you do not have full control of your currency. As historian Thomas Bailey noted, every year gold and silver money, much of it in quaint Spanish coins from the West Indies, was drained out of the colonies. The colonials simply did not have enough left for the convenience of everyday purchases. Barter became necessary, and even butter, nails, pitch, and feathers were used for purposes of exchange. But bartering has its limits, doesn't it? First, you have to find somebody who has something you want, and then you have to have the thing that they want in exchange. And of course, you both have to come to terms and agree on the value, that it is of equal value. So it is challenging, and it also can be complicated. For example, here's a quick example of how much detail went into these kinds of barters. To exchange his tobacco for goods, a middling farmer had to take the tobacco packed in a W, a large size barrel, to the inspectors at a Virginia warehouse. By law, there had to be at least 1,000 pounds net tobacco within the hogshead. 2 inspectors had to agree that the tobacco was either good or bad. If bad, the tobacco was burned. If good, the tobacco was weighed and placed in the warehouse, and a tobacco note was issued to the farmer. The farmer then took the note to a merchant to exchange for store credit or cash. And so the colonies printed money. And let's take a closer look at that. But first, let's start with the easy part. Today, American currency consists of the following denominations: $1, $2, $5, $10, $20, $50, $100. This is what you're familiar with, right? Good. But back in 1775, much different. The 13 colonies, also called the Continental Congress, created their own currency called what else? Continental currency. But as historian Eric Newman has noted, the different denomination used on paper money in colonial and revolutionary America reflects the changing economic conditions which confronted the people. And notice this part: the number of denominations officially adopted staggers the imagination. Here's why he says that. This is an example of just two colonies, and one which had the lowest dollar denominations and the other which had the highest dollar denominations. Now remember, we have the $2, $5, $10, $150. This is what they were dealing with. Rhode Island and Virginia. Of course, Virginia having the highest dollar denominations. This is how much different currency was floating around at the time. And if you were trying to trade, if you're trying to purchase or pay debts, this is all the currency options that were available at the time. So it's definitely much more simplified today. But again, this was in part a reaction to the influence of the British government and how it withheld gold and silver from the colonies through their efforts to keep that money and limit it within the colonies. But there was a lot more than just what you see on this screen. Let's take an even closer look at what they had at the time. Pause the video if you want to look at the states and if you want to look at the details of these particular denominations. But at this time, the British economy was based on mercantilism, which is the idea that to be wealthy, you had to have more gold coming into the British Empire than leaving the empire. And this was, well, really the only reason anyone bothered to have colonies was to have them produce the raw materials, which the empire then used to manufacture goods to sell back to the colonies. And of course, the colonies did get gold and silver from Mexico and the West Indies, but they had to quickly spend it to pay back the British Empire for goods. And of course, the British preferred to be paid by the colonies in gold and silver. Now, you print money in times of crisis, and certainly the American Revolution was a time of crisis. But the problem is when you're using money for the military, and in fact, paper money was used to pay soldiers in the American Revolution, there's still always the temptation to print more than the stated emergency. And that's certainly what a couple of the colonies did. And this, of course, leads to inflation. And on top of this, British sources counterfeited the American currency and put that in circulation, which just further cheapened the value of the continental currency and even the respect that it initially had among the colonists. And the problem was so bad that it even led to the well-known phrase, "not worth a continental." No wonder the colonists were fed up. So let's quickly go back and revisit John Lynns in answer to the Declaration of the American Congress. I said earlier in this video that Lynn argued the king only exercises his powers when it's necessary and wholesome. And we know that he was basically turning the words around of the Declaration of Independence. But still, what he meant with its controls over production and currency, was in the best interest of the empire. But why? Well, there's a very simple explanation given by Thomas Munn. Now, Thomas Munn was an English writer on economics, and he says for the British Empire to become increasingly powerful was simple. The way to increase our wealth and treasure is by foreign trade, wherein we must observe, and this is important, this rule, to sell more to strangers yearly than we consume of theirs in value. I like that because it's a very simple definition of more exports than imports means you have more gold coming in to your empire than going on to other places. But what was working for the British Empire, at least in theory, was creating real economic hardship in the 13 colonies. And so when the Continental Congress drafted the Declaration of Independence, that is in part what Thomas Jefferson meant when he wrote, "He has refused his assent to laws, the most wholesome and necessary for the public good." That's all I have for now. So thank you for watching. And if you'd like to know more, be sure to read the notes that I left in the description with some links for additional information. Also, feel free to comment. I do want to know what you think, any thoughts that you might have. I'm looking forward to learning from you as well. And if you have some questions, go ahead and leave it there. And also, I'll have a new video soon. In the meantime, if you want to make your life more pleasurable, feel free to hit the subscribe button. And remember, the past is never dead. It isn't even past.